So chapter 10 will start, and it talks about a little book. My Bible heads the chapter as the little book. And I can imagine that by now John is having a hard time with all of this. He trusts God, but it must feel like he's having a nightmare he can't wake up out of. We've had 2 of the 3 woes. The 5th and 6th trumpet has been opened. And if we can remember that, there was a lot of things going on at that particular time. The sun and the moon and the stars were darkened by a third, and more of the earth was destroyed, and people were destroyed. And the violence and death and destruction, fires, earthquakes, and scorpions. Remember the scorpions with the teeth like lions, and a horde of demonic soldiers led by demons surfacing and coming out of the Euphrates River and killing billions of people. And all this began when Jesus took that title deed. Remember the title deed that he took very early that God gave him? He took back the title to the earth. And today we're going to talk about another little book that kind of coincides with that title. Verse 1 here. I saw another strong angel coming down out of heaven, clothed with a cloud, and the rainbow was upon his head, and his face was like the sun, and his feet like pillars of fire. This mighty angel can really be nobody other than Jesus Christ. And notice the rainbow that he has on his head. John saw one of these earlier, remember, above the throne, back in one of the previous chapters. There was a rainbow uncovering that throne where God and where Jesus was. And now it circles Christ, and John identifies it as the rainbow. He says, look at the rainbow. So it's that rainbow is specifically Christ's rainbow. It's not a rainbow, it's the rainbow. And I'm kind of wondering just myself, is that the same rainbow that Noah saw? Remember when Noah saw that rainbow after the flood and all? And that was a sign of peace and prosperity, and times are going to get better. And I wonder if Jesus is giving him a little bit of a look now at this rainbow, letting him know that things will be better here. It's a great time of distress and a great time of judgment, but things will hopefully, this rainbow is offering hope to John and to the people then, because we have to understand again that there's a lot of folks living through this time period. There's a popular Christian song, do you remember it? It says, although the battle rages on, the war is already won. And that's kind of what we're saying here. There's a battle going on, but the war was won 2,000 years ago with Christ's death and burial and resurrection. Verse 2, it says, and he had, this would be Jesus, he had in his hand a little book which was open, and he placed his right foot on the sea and his left on the land. So he's seeing Jesus come in his second appearance. This is where, when Jesus comes to earth in his second appearance, in the second coming, he will literally stand on the mountain with one foot on the mountain and one foot on the sea. And rightfully so, he owns it. He owns the earth. He's got that book, that first book. He's got that title deed to the earth, and now he's coming down to earth, and he's standing on both the sea and both the land saying, this is mine. Psalms 95:5 says, the sea is his, for it was he who made it, and his hands formed the dry land. So the little book in his hands that he's got now is a new book. It's a different book. It's not the title deed to the earth. That was the scroll, remember? And the scroll hasn't really completely been opened yet because we've only opened up 6 of the 7 seals so far. But this new book, it's an inheritance, basically, is what it is. And it's our inheritance. Think of it this way. Jesus was just given the inheritance, the title deed to the earth, and he has it in his hands. We are going to inherit the earth, are we not? Didn't he say that? He said that in the next chapter, the next verse, that the meek will inherit the earth. And so he's already paid for this inheritance on the cross. His blood gave us an inheritance. If I inherited 100 acres of land and I had 20 children and I wanted to divide it up, I could take a subtitle to that land and I could split it up and I could give them each a portion of that land. And it seems to me that that's what Jesus is now. He's doling out that land for our inheritance. Christ wasn't kidding when he said, blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. And this is what he is doing right now. So think of it like this way. Think of this Jesus as being here and saying, look, I'm still in charge. Sit down, relax, look at what's going on before this final woe comes to pass, I'm still in charge, and I want you to remember that this is the inheritance. This is what you will receive. And he's taking it on our benefit. This inheritance then was given to him for all of us, so every saint. Even the saints in the Old Testament will inherit it too. So this land, this earth will belong to us one day. This whole new kingdom will belong to us one day. Verse 3, and he cried out with a loud voice as when a lion roars. And when he cried out, the 7 peals of thunder uttered their voices. We've already heard Christ's voice compared to a great trumpet. We've heard it compared to the sounds of many waters. And here it sounds like a lion that roars. And if you remember the Bible, you remember the book of Matthew was represented by a lion. When we looked at the different books of the Gospels, one was an eagle, one was a man, one was a bull, and the book of Matthew was represented by a lion. And the book of Matthew, it's one of its sole purposes. It starts off with the genealogy of Christ. One of the sole purposes of the book of Matthew is to tell us that Jesus is the king. He is their rightful king. He's the son of David. And it's to prove to people that he has the right to give us this inheritance. And I think we hear that lion's voice now telling us the same thing. The voice of the lion, the voice of Matthew, is saying, I have the right to give you this inheritance. Psalms 29:1 says, ascribe to the Lord, O sons of the mighty. Ascribe to the Lord glory and strength. Ascribe to the Lord the glory due to his name. Worship the Lord in holy array. The voice of the Lord is upon the waters. The God of glory thunders. The Lord is over many waters. And so we hear 7 different aspects of Christ in this verse. Let's continue here for a minute. It says, the voice of the Lord is one, powerful. So we've already heard the voice of the Lord as a lion. We've heard the voice of the Lord as many waters. Now we hear the voice of the Lord is powerful. The voice of the Lord is majestic. That would be the next thing that we can ascribe to his voice. The voice of the Lord breaks the cedars. That would be another aspect of his voice. Yes, the Lord breaks in pieces the cedars of Lebanon. He makes Lebanon skip like a calf and Syrian like a young wild ox. The voice of the Lord hews out the flames of fire. That's the 4th aspect of his voice. The voice of the Lord shakes the wilderness. The Lord shakes the wilderness of Kadesh. The voice of the Lord makes the deer to calve. That would be the 6th aspect of his voice. And strips the forest bare, 7. And in his temple everything says glory. The Lord sat as king at the flood. Yes, the Lord sits as king forever. So that Psalms describes these 7 characteristics of God's voice. Really, when I think about it, I can't wait to hear it. I mean, it's going to be, when we'll hear more of it in the book of Revelation, but we'll hear that the waters represent nations, and so when his voice sounds like many waters, I think what it means is when he speaks all languages at once. Every language that's known to mankind, he speaks at once, and it comes out like this flowing water sound, but we perceive what he's saying. It's going to be beautiful to hear his voice. 10:4, when the 7 peals of thunder had spoken, see that? Again, the 7 is what? Completeness and perfection and wholeness, holiness. When the 7 peals of thunder had spoken, I was about to write, and I heard a voice from heaven saying, seal up the things which the 7 peals of thunder have spoken, and do not write them. This has got to be the voice of God, because we've been listening to Jesus, and now we have this other voice come out of heaven. So this must be the voice of the Father. And it's a bit strange here that he tells him to seal it up. Seal up the things which the 7 peals of thunder have spoken, and do not write them. So it means to me that I think that he wants to leave what he said to him then as a secret until then, until that time. When that time is finally finished, then we'll know what those words were. And he also appears that God wants the fulfillment of the judgment to wait just a bit longer. Remember, we're right at the halfway point. We're right here. This is still at the halfway point. We haven't gone much farther than this. Once we open up that 3rd woe, we will enter into the great tribulation. And so he wants us to go just a bit longer, specifically for the next 3.5 years. I think God is saying, just hold off before you let that go. Let's go. We've got to get a little bit more work to do. He did the same thing at Noah's Ark. Remember that? He shut Noah up in the ark, and what did he do after he shut him up in the ark? He waited 7 days before he brought on the deluge, before he brought on the rain. Genesis 7:4 says, and for 7 more days I will send, and after 7 more days I will send rain on the earth, 40 days and 40 nights, and I will blot out from the face of the land every living thing that I have made. Is he having second thoughts? No, he's not. He's not having second thoughts. But he waits before that judgment comes. And I think this is what we're having now. It's kind of a halfway point, catching our breath again before that final woe comes out. And when it does, that'll be a big one. Sodom and Gomorrah, remember the same thing? In a sense, where they said if we can find 50 righteous men or 40 righteous men or 30 righteous men, and so kind of a chance to kind of just I'm in the salvation business, he says, so I don't need much. Daniel got that same response. Write this down if you want to. Daniel 12, verses 8 through 11. When Daniel had a vision similar to this, here's what Daniel said. As for me, I heard but could not understand. So I said, my Lord, what will be the outcome of these events? Daniel's asking them, what will be the outcome of all of this? What's going to happen? He said, go your way, Daniel, for these words are concealed and sealed up until the end time. Many will be purged and purified and refined, but the wicked will act wickedly, and none of the wicked will understand, but those who have insight will understand. He's saying here, those who have insight, in other words, those who are looking for it, those who are prepared, those who know what's going on, like we do today. We have that insight, and so we'll be saved. And then this is an interesting verse in here, verse 11. It says, from the time that the regular sacrifice is abolished and the abomination of desolation set up, there will be 1,290 days. So what we have is he's talking about this. Remember we said that this is at the halfway point. The Antichrist reveals himself in the temple. They're sacrificing, and the Antichrist reveals himself. And he said there'll be 1,290 days. Well, we've got 1,260 days down here. We've got 1,260 days down here. So actually what we have to do then is over here, we have to add another 30 days. And we'll get to that later on. Because Daniel said that this is 3.5 years. It's 42 months. 42 months. And then we'll have the lunar calendar of 30 days a month. But Daniel tells us we have an extra 30 days to deal with over there. We'll take care of that when we get there. But Daniel saw the same thing. Is what the point of this is. Daniel saw the same thing, and God said the same thing to him. Wait, don't write this down at this particular point. Verses 5 and 6. Then the angel whom I saw standing on the sea and on the land lifted up his right hand to heaven and swore by him who lives forever and ever, who created heaven and all the things in it, and the earth and the things in it, and the sea and the things in it, that there will be delay no longer. And so this judgment that has been deferred, this opening of this last trumpet, will be delayed no longer from this point. It's going to be opened up. It's been promised, and it's going to happen. Revelation 10:7. But in the days of the voice of the seventh angel, when he is about to sound, then the mystery of God is finished, as he preached to his servants, the prophets. The mystery of God. What's the mystery of God? Which one, right? I think the mystery that he's talking about here, when they sound this last trumpet, when this trumpet sounds, when the Antichrist reveals himself, everybody's going to know what's going on. Everybody is finally going to know what's going on. And many of those mysteries of God that we have, the mysteries of Christ, they'll be answered at that point. There are so many mysteries. I mean, you read through the Bible, and most of it's a mystery in that sense, and only available to those who have the Holy Spirit. But there are other mysteries that we don't know right now. But I think what they're referring to here is the fact that everything will be revealed. At this particular point, then, we're going to realize that this is a battle against good and evil, that this is a battle against Satan, and it's a battle against God. It's good against evil. Some of the mysteries that we might learn about is why do the righteous suffer? Maybe during this time we'll figure out why the righteous suffer, so that they're suffering for the sake of God, and they're going to be saved in heaven. Why has God allowed evil to thrive so long? Why do we live in why have we been in this situation that we've been in since, the day after Adam and Eve ate the apple? Why have we been in a situation like this for so long? We'll understand all of these. We'll probably understand God's ultimate plan for Israel and for his church. So I think we'll see wonderful things happening and revealed during this time too. We'll be in heaven, but the people on earth will see wonderful things revealed during this time and understand what it is. In the next few chapters too, it's interesting that at this time that we'll see that the devil puts an end to all other religions. And that's really interesting, that there is no other religions. There's no more voodoo and occultism. There's no more astrology. There's no more spiritualism. There's no more false religions. There's no more false doctrine. There's no more false theology. There's no more idol worship. The devil is going to destroy every other religion, and it's going to be him and God, and that's it. So all of these religions that he's used to turn us away from God over all of these years we'll realize that I was following this faith, but I was really following him. And so that's another mystery that'll be cleared up. We'll see all this when we get into it, but that's down the road. Revelation 10:8 says, "Then the voice which I heard from heaven, I heard again speaking with me and saying, 'Go, take the book which is open in the hand of the angel who stands on the sea and on the land.'" So here's Jesus standing on the sea and on the land with this little book in his hand, and he holds it out. And John goes over and takes the book. Revelations 4:1, it says, "After these things I looked, and behold, a door standing open in heaven, and the first voice which I heard, like the sound of a trumpet speaking with me, 'Come up here, and I will show you.'" So this great voice had already spoken to John before. He'd spoken to him in chapter 4, verse 1. And now he says this. He says, in verse 4, Revelation 10:4, "When the 7 peals of thunder had spoken, I was about to write, and I heard a voice from heaven saying, 'Seal up the things which the 7 peals of thunder have spoken, and do not write them.'" So now he's saying, go and take that from his hand. And he did. He went over and he took the book from his hand. And again, this book, I think, represents mankind. It's our inheritance, like I said. Daniel, look at Daniel 12:9. It says, "Go your way, Daniel, for these words are concealed and sealed up until the end time. But as for you, go your way to the end. Then you will enter into rest and rise again, for your allotted portion at the end of the age." His allotted portion is his inheritance. So Daniel was assured inheritance in the Old Testament, and now we're assured an inheritance in the New Testament. You see that where it says, "For your allotted portion will be at the end of the age"? So we know that all of the Old Testament saints and all of the New Testament saints will inherit the earth when it's time. But remember Joshua in the Bible? Remember, what did he do? He divided the land that the people inherited into what? The 12 tribes? Same thing. Joshua inherited the land for the people, and then he divided it up for the people. And John is inheriting the earth for us, and now this little book is going to give us, that's our deed. That's our personal deed, if you will, to the earth. So it's good stuff. Revelation 10:9, "So I went to the angel, telling him to give me the little book, and he said to me, 'Take it and eat it. It will make your stomach bitter, but in your mouth it will taste sweet as honey.'" Jesus gave it to him. John, I don't think, was being presumptuous in this fact, and Jesus was happy to give it. Jesus was happy to hand him over his promise, his inheritance, because this is what Jesus has promised since the very beginning, that we would share. If we are his children, if we are God's children, we share the same inheritance that Jesus Christ has. However, though, I guess when we look at it, we'll see that some serious consequences that involve this bitter and sweet aspect of the book. It's bittersweet, if you will. Christ said, "Eat of the book," and King David said that his law, if you remember, King David said that his law was sweet as honey, but bitter in the mouth. In other words, the law was good for us. The law was sweet, but it was bitter too, because it was something that we had to follow and couldn't follow. And so there was that bitterness to that sweetness of it was given. Ezekiel was given a book to eat containing lamentations and mournings, if you remember that. And when he ate it too, he said it was as sweet as honey. But he said right after he ate it, his stomach became bitter. And today, people then, like Israel back then, we feel the same way. The Word of God is sweet to us. There's a lot of folks out there I know that tell me, oh, I like God and I listen to God and I read His Bible and all that, but they don't live godly lives because it's too bitter to swallow. That feels good, it reads good, and it feels good when you're reading it, and it's a sweet taste in your mouth, but when you swallow it, you just can't. You just give up. It's just too much. It's too bitter. So I think it's true then. It's true now in the same way. Revelations 19:4 says this. This is the climax of it. If it's true now and it was true then, it'll be true at the end here. So if this is this sweet, bitter taste that goes all the way through the whole Bible, will be true at the very end. And I think that's what's going to happen. We're going to find that people during this time period, naturally, it's just too bitter for them to take. And we'll see this when we come to judge the earth. Revelations 19:14 says, "And the armies which are in heaven, clothed in fine linen, with white and clean, were following him on his white horse." When he comes back to judge this final judgment at the end of this book, and he comes back, and this war of Armageddon that takes place right here at the end of this 7-year period, we'll see that bitterness come to fruition. We'll see what has to happen to take care of all those people who tried to swallow this and couldn't do it. Revelation 10:10, "I took the little book out of the angel's hand and ate it, and in my mouth it was sweet as honey, and when I had eaten it, my stomach was made bitter." So it looks like the first part of this tribulation is kind of a time of observance, but now at the halfway point, it's really, really, really going to become bitter. The first part of it was bad enough, but the second part of it is really going to be the worst part. And verse 11 says, "And they said to me, you must prophesy again concerning many nations and peoples and tongues and kings." So John meets this angel at the second coming, at the final command, and he's witnessed these seals being opened. He's witnessed the trumpets blow. He's listened to the voices of all of these thunders, and he's probably thinking the same time. The time has come to do what he was told, to write all this down. Do you remember he was told to write all this down? Put this back in Revelation 1:11. "Write in a book what you see and send it to the 7 churches," and it lists the names of the 7 churches. But then he probably realizes that the job is only half done, because look what it says. It says you have to prophesy again. "And they said to me, you must prophesy again concerning many peoples and nations and tongues and things." How's he doing that? Let me ask you a question. How's he doing that?
Is it sending letters out? What? Sending letters out?
Yeah, exactly right. He's prophesying right now. See, it's not done, so he's prophesying right now. He's prophesying, he's doing just what it says. "And they said to me, you must prophesy again concerning many peoples and nations and tongues and kings." And so God's telling him back then, don't tell this now. Don't let the secret out now in that sense, what I don't want you to do now. That will be known when it's ready, but you still have time to prophesy and let people know. So that's chapter 10. Let me stop here for a second. Any questions on chapter 10? To me, chapter 11, this is the most amazing event, I think one of the most amazing events that happens during this time. And it's the happening of the 2 witnesses. And forget about the chapter break here. This is still Christ talking to Paul. This is to John. This is still him talking. So forget about this chapter break. Christ is the strong angel, and he's still talking here. And we just saw the end. We just saw the end of the 7-year tribulation period, and now we're going all the way back to the front. This is another one of those meanwhile back at the ranch moments, okay? And he's telling us this before he opens up onto this second half of this tribulation period. And I think this is just incredible what's happening here. The 2 witnesses, I believe, are human beings. And we'll go through that and try to identify them this morning. And I believe that they're human beings. A lot of people try to allegorize them away, and they try to say, well, it could be the Old Testament. One could be an angel or a spirit representing the Old Testament. One could be an angel or a spirit representing the New Testament. They could be, I don't know, they just try to make one could be the church. One could be the representative of the law. One could be a representative of the grace and all of this. I think it's just two people. And I think it is, and I think it's because they show up in verse 3, write this down, and they're dead in verse 7. And so it has to be a meanwhile back at the ranch moment too, because they have to be dead here. They can't go into here. And so what he's going to do is we're going to go meanwhile back at the ranch, and we're going to talk about what happens from here to here. And it's going to take basically about 4 verses just to let us know what's going on there. It says, and there was given me a measuring rod like a staff, and someone said, rise and measure the temple of God and the altar and those who worship in it. So John's been giving this measuring rod, and he's told to measure the temple and the altar and all of those who are in it. And the first thing, I guess, is to understand that some sort of a temple has been rebuilt in Jerusalem. Now, a lot of folks say that this can't happen because the temple is now, a mosque, and it's not available and all of this. But a temple in the Old Testament was a tent in the desert with a wall around it. So anything can be used as a temple. We don't have to wait for this glorious grand temple that they had in the Old Testament to be rebuilt. Any temple could be erected out here in the lawn for all intents and purposes. And he's telling them that we know that, and from earlier, that the Antichrist reveals himself at the halfway point when they're doing sacrifices again. When they're doing sacrifices. So I think that's an abomination to God, that the Jews at this particular point are sacrificing again, because Jesus died once and for all sins, for all time. And so this is an abomination to God. The Jewish folks are planning this at some particular point in the future, but it's not really what God wants. I guess I told you, maybe I did, maybe I didn't, but we belong to the Sadducees group, a Jewish group, and we give to the Jewish people. And we got a letter here about maybe 6 years ago in the mail that they wanted money for a sheep. They wanted money for a lamb because their PETA, I guess, if you will, their protection for animals and things, finally loosened up gave them the ability to sacrifice when the time came. So the Sanhedrin have already said, we're all ready to sacrifice. We want you to give us money so that when the time comes we can buy sheep. We've got all of the instruments that we need. We have all of the tools and of the trade and everything we need, and we've put it aside, and the Sanhedrin have said when the time comes we can start. And that was about 5 or 6 years ago. So you think the end time's getting near? I mean, it's incredible that all of these things are happening at this particular point. And the Sanhedrin is like the Jewish Supreme Court, and they said, yes, we can go. So they have the approval.
Yeah, Ray, I just want to be clear. So the first half of the tribulation is when the sacrifices are going to be taking place, you think?
Yes.
And that will also be the same time that our 2 witnesses are witnessing to the Jews?
Yes, yeah. We'll see that during this time period, there's 2 witnesses witnessing to not just the Jews, to the world, because they will be in Jerusalem, but they'll probably show up on CNN and Fox News and everybody else, and and you're just going to hear these people witnessing for 3.5 years nonstop. So you've got, during this time period, the first half, God is in the salvation business, so the whole world will hear his word. Remember the old saying that before the end comes, the entire world will hear the gospel? Well, they're going to hear it now, because this is going to be all over the world. It'll be almost impossible for you not to hear it. The second thing that happens is 2 angels fly in the sky for the next 3.5 years after that. Now 2 angels circle the earth and preach the gospel for 3.5 years. And so everybody will hear it, even in the remotest parts of Africa or wherever you want to be, in the deserts or wherever. So during this whole 7-year period, the word of God is being spoken to the people. The word of God is being spoken to the people. It says measure the people, measure the temple. In other words, he's measuring the people. And he's saying when he says measure that temple, he's measuring the people. And the people fall short, don't we? When you measure us up against God, we all fall short. So Israel, I think, is about to enter her time of greatest suffering. And God will use a wicked Gentile army to discipline them. Look at the next verse. Look at verse 2. It says, leave out the court which is outside the temple, and do not measure it, for it has been given to the nations, that's the Gentiles, the nations, and it will be tread underfoot the holy city for 42 months. So the outer courtyard of the temple was known as the temple of the Gentiles. So we measured this courtyard and we measured the people in it, and they didn't measure up. And now don't measure this courtyard because the Gentiles are going to invade the temple, and for 42 months they'll hold it under. It'll be their judgment for 42 months. Luke 21:24 says, and they will fall by the edge of the sword and will be led captive into all the nations. And Jerusalem will be trampled underfoot by the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled. So there's two ways to look at that. The first way to look at it is the times of the Gentiles. We're into the time of the Gentiles right now. We're under the time of the Gentiles. And what's happening is when it says the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled, I guess I've already told you this, every time somebody gets baptized, I go, yeah, one more. Because there must be a time period when this will be all fulfilled. So the more people we baptize and the quicker we baptize, and that's my line of thinking, is the quicker this will happen. But it's also that the time during this time period could be the time to be fulfilled until this 42 months is over. And that's the last 3.5 years. Matthew 24:21-22 says this, for then there will be a great tribulation. So that's where we are in Matthew right now. We're right at that halfway point. For then there will be a great tribulation, such as not occurred since the beginning of the world until now, or never will. Unless those days had been cut short, in other words, 3.5 years, that's 3.5 years, they didn't have the great tribulation all the way through it, just a short time period, 3.5 years. No life, if it wasn't cut short, no life would have been saved, but for the sake of the elect. See that? There's still people being saved during that time period. For the sake of the elect, those days will be cut short. So that proves to me that some people who say that nobody will be saved during this time period, that the salvation is all done, that the church was taken away at the rapture and nobody else is going to be saved, is wrong. And then also Mark 13, this is an interesting verse too. It says, Mark chapter 13, beginning in verse 14, says, but when you see the abomination of desolation standing where it should not be, that's the Antichrist. That's standing here in the halfway point, and he reveals himself at that point. When you see him standing there, flee. Judea must flee to the mountains. Verse 15. The one who is on the housetop must not go down or go get anything in the house. And the ones who is in the field must not turn back to get his coat. But woe, see the woe? It puts it in there, it puts it in that time period too, because this is the time of the 3 woes. So it puts it right in there. But woe to those who are pregnant and to those who are nursing babies in those days. But pray that it may not happen in the winter. For those days will be a time of tribulation such as not occurred since the beginning of the creation, which God created until now and never will. Unless the Lord had shortened those days, no life would have been saved. But for the sake of the elect, whom he chose, he shortened the days, 3.5 years. And then if anyone says to you, behold, here is the Christ, or behold, he is there, do not believe him, for false Christs and false prophets will arise and will show signs and wonders in order to lead astray, if possible, the elect. But take heed, behold, I have told you everything in advance. And so that's where you fit those Bible verses in from the book of Mark. That's where they go at that time period. Then all of a sudden, in the next verse, the mighty angel, Jesus, he changes the subject. And the next thing he talks about is his 2 witnesses. So let's look at that. And this is probably as far as we'll get here, but we'll look and see what it says. Verse 3 says, "And I will grant authority to my 2 witnesses, and they will prophesy for 1,260 days, clothed in sackcloth." So you see that? That's the 1,260 days of the first half, the 42 months with the 30 days each. So they will prophesy during those 1,260 days. And they must be prophets, I believe, because they're clothed in sackcloth. Who was clothed in sackcloth? The prophets, right? Most of the time. Remember I call them the turn and burns when everything was going good, and people, prosperity and peace and plenty and all the peas, and the people were good. And then it started getting bad, and the prophet would come and wear sackcloth and burn ashes on him, and then the people would turn back to God. So to me, these are 2 prophets. And he says that they said that they're my witnesses. You notice in that verse he said, "I will grant authority to my 2 witnesses." Whose witnesses are those? Jesus's. Further proof that this angel is Jesus and not just an angel, because an angel wouldn't say they're my witnesses if it wasn't the angel of Christ. I think they're prophets. I said I think they preach to the people, both Jews and Gentiles alike, for this time period. Like I said, some folks just allegorize them away. They're really great men, or they're men of the time period, or perhaps they're one represents the law, one represents grace, one represents the old prophets, one represents the new. And that's maybe possible, but it's highly unlikely as far as I'm concerned, because Christ calls them my witnesses, and we learn in chapter 7 that they're destined to die. And we know the church isn't going to die. We know the law isn't going to die. We know all of this. So it has to be 2 people, and that they're not allegorical. The last book of the Old Testament is Malachi, and in the last 2 verses of the last book in the Old Testament, the last words spoken are a prophet, and prophecy, and let's read them and see what they say. It says, "Behold, I am going to send you Elijah, the prophet, before the coming of the great and terrible day of the Lord." So that great and terrible day of the Lord, before that comes, I'm going to send you Elijah, and he will restore the hearts of their fathers to their children, and the hearts of the children to their fathers, so that I will not come and smite the land with a curse. Now, some people say that was fulfilled by John the Baptist, remember? But John the Baptist, look at the next verse, John 1:21. When they asked John, they said, "What then? Are you Elijah?" And he said, "No, I'm not." "And are you a prophet?" And he answered, "No." So this can't be him. This can't be John the Baptist. It can't be, because this is a prophet, and he said he wasn't Elijah to begin with. Jesus said this in Matthew 17:11, "And Jesus answered and said unto them, Elijah truly shall first come, and then restore all things." Well, if Elijah comes at this time, and then everybody hears him, all things will be restored in this 1,000-year time period. So Elijah has to come before things are all restored at this 1,000-year time period. And remember, Elijah didn't die. Elijah never died. He was taken up in a chariot and in a whirlwind. And God requires all men are appointed to die once. That's God's own words. All men are appointed to die once. Look at Hebrews 9:27. "And inasmuch as it is appointed for men to die once, and after this comes judgment." 2 Kings 2:11 says, "And it came to pass, as they still went on and talked about that, behold, there appeared a chariot of fire and the horses of fire, and parted them both asunder, and Elijah went up by a whirlwind into heaven." So Elijah was no more deserving than any other people mentioned, any other prophets mentioned in the Bible, but he must have had a reason for keeping him alive, for keeping his ministry alive, and keeping him in his natural body for all these years. And I think it's probably specifically for this purpose. Let's stop right here. The thing that gets me about this is, really gets me about this is he in heaven in his mortal body? I mean, that would be wild, isn't it? I mean, there must be some kind of a stipulation for this, but can you imagine just being taken up to heaven right now and being there in your mortal body and seeing? I don't know. I've asked that question. It keeps me awake at night, but I can't find the answer to it. All I know is he's taken up to heaven. But I know his mortal body will be back down here. It'll be protected down here when it comes back down, but he will come back down in his mortal body. I don't know. Wouldn't it be wild to be in heaven with a mortal body right now? What's for dinner? Yeah, actually, Moses died, and Michael fought the devil for his body. If you remember that, why don't we have Moses? Why did God want to hide his body? Why don't we have Moses' body? Yeah, we'd have the Church of the Moses here on every street corner, you know. So Moses died, and the people would have worshipped Moses over God over that time period.
Jews to some extent do.
They do, exactly. Abraham and Moses, and sure.
Unless there's some connection between God wanting the body of Moses, just like he wanted the body of Elijah for the end times.
No, because he says that he was buried. No one knows where he's buried. Michael didn't rebuke the devil. He said, the Lord rebuked you, but then he was buried. His body was buried.
He was buried after the fight. Oh.
Yes, and nobody to this day knows where it's just buried. So anyway, I think Moses can't be the other prophet either, because he's already died. His body's been buried and gone. But there was another man named Enoch, and he was taken up into heaven. Let's look at this, 11:5, Hebrews 11:5. It says, by faith Enoch was taken up so that he would not see death, and he was not found because God took him up. For he obtained the witness that before his being taken up, he was pleasing to God. I like the fact that verse also says he obtained the witness, because he is a witness. I think he's the second witness in this whole thing. And it would fit in both, and it would fit very well when you look at Bible theology. It would fit really, really well, because think about this. Christ is the firstborn of the resurrection. So these guys, first off, before I tell you that, these guys first off need to be re-resurrected, or need to be resurrected. They didn't die. Everybody in some time will go to heaven with that brand new body. When we get there, we'll be resurrected. Christ is the first fruits. And the resurrection, believe it or not, never stops until the very, very end. Sometimes we think the resurrection is over. You know, Christ was resurrected 2,000 years ago, and it's over. It's not. He was the first fruits of the resurrection. But each and every one of us who dies now will be resurrected. Each and every one of the persons who died during that time, even the people that died during that 1,000-year reign of Christ on earth, there'll be fleshly people on earth. They will be resurrected, and then finally it will end when the new heaven and the new earth comes. But the resurrection is continuing all of the time. Kind of an interesting concept to think of, that it hasn't stopped since Christ's death, burial, and resurrection. 1 Corinthians 15 says this. It says, for as in Adam all die, so also in Christ all will be made alive, but each in his own order. Christ the first fruits, after that those who are Christ's at his coming. And I think the final piece of this puzzle is that for the first 2,000 years, from Adam to Abraham, God spoke to the nation, to the people as a whole, and that was Enoch's ministry during that time period. He came right in that time period, in the middle of that first couple thousand years. And then for the next 2,000 years, Abraham came up to Christ, and God spoke through the Jews, and Elijah ministered to the nations during that time. Elijah ministered so one ministered to the people and one ministered to the nations. And so we have these two witnesses doing the same thing. One, the people should be able to identify, the people being the Jewish people, and one, the Gentiles should be able to identify. Those who know and read the Bible should be able to identify. So I just think it makes sense that those two men are the two witnesses and who they are. So I think all this is simply one more reason to believe that that's who they are. Chapter 11:4 says this: these are the two olive trees and the two lampstands that stand before the Lord of the earth. And if anyone desires to harm them, fire proceeds out of their mouth and devours their enemies. And if anyone would desire to harm them in this manner, he must be killed. Some people say, you can translate that, I guess, two ways, how they are killed. It says, again, let me read verse 5. If anyone desires to harm them, fire proceeds out of their mouth and devours their enemies. And if anyone would desire to harm them in this manner, he must be killed. So I'm thinking that that's how they're killed, as fire comes out. In other words, if you try to shoot them, you can't shoot them, but fire would come out of their mouth. Or you try to nuke them, you can't nuke them, but fire would come out of their mouth. Now some people say, I've heard some people say, no, you're going to be killed in the manner, it means in the manner to which you tried to assault them. In other words, if you took a sword and went up and tried to cut their head off, that would happen. I don't think that's right. I just think it's in the manner, fire comes out of their mouth, and this is in the manner of how you will be destroyed. So if anybody tries to destroy them, then fire will come out of their mouth. And it says here in verse 6, they have the power to shut up the sky in order that rain may not fall during the days of their prophesying, and they have power over the waters to turn them into blood and smite the earth with every plague as often as they desire. Now, think about that for a minute. Let's go through that. They have the power to shut up the sky so that in order that rain may not fall during the days of their prophesying. So no rain has fallen on the earth for 3.5 years. There hasn't been a drop of rain for 3.5 years on the face of the earth, and we've had all of these fires, and we've heard the water turning to wormwood, and we've had all of this happen, and there's been no rain during that time period. And to smite the earth with every plague as often as they desire. There must be plagues going around the world at that time too. There must be pandemics like we have now, and plagues and things like that happening. So all of the time that they're witnessing, there's no water, there's fire on the earth, there's blackness and darkness, there's sun and the moon and the stars have been shining less, and it's just and that's not even the Great Tribulation. We're not even getting that far. Verse 7, and when they have finished their testimony, the beasts that come up out of the abyss will make war with them and overcome them and kill them. So when they have finished their time period, look what it takes. It doesn't take a battle. It doesn't take a skirmish. It doesn't take an order, I guess, in that sense. It doesn't take a small command of men to go out. It takes a war to kill them. That's how powerful that these men are. It literally takes, I'm literally looking at, when I'm thinking war, I'm thinking of tanks and machine guns and bombs and everything else to finally kill these men. But they're saved for 3.5 years. They're safe, and they prophesy and they witness for 3.5 years. And it says, and then their dead bodies will lie in the street of the great city, which mystically is called Sodom and Egypt, where also their Lord was crucified. So this is going to be quite a time. And then let's go back to, I read ahead a little bit, but I want to read these verses to catch up. Let's go back to Genesis 5:22-24. It says, and Enoch walked with God 300 years after he became the father of Methuselah. And he had other sons and daughters, and so all the days of Enoch were 365 years. Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. He walked with God, and then all of a sudden he was not, because God took him. 1 Kings 17 says, now Elijah the Tishbite, who was of the settlers of Gilead, said to Ahab, as the Lord, the God of Israel lives, before whom I stand, surely there shall be neither dew nor rain these years except by my word. Remember that? So we know now that Elijah had that power to shut the rain off for 3.5 years. Matthew 23:37-38. It says, Jerusalem, Jerusalem. I think this is Jesus, and he's lamenting all of this. He says, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, who kills the prophets and stones those who are sent to her. How often I wanted to gather your children together the way a hen gathers her chicks under her wings, and you were unwilling. Behold, your house is being left to you desolate. So by now, Jerusalem is really just decayed to the point where it's compared to Sodom and Gomorrah, Sodom and Egypt. And then the same streets that Christ walked for his resurrection, that Christ walked on to go to his cross, now has two bodies laying in it. These two prophets are laying dead. Revelations 11:9 says, and those from the peoples and tribes and tongues and nations will look at their dead bodies for 3.5 days and will not permit them to be laid in the tomb. So we see that they're dead. They came here in verse 3, they were dead in verse 7, and that's it. That's the first part of that time period. I imagine that it'll be all over the news. It'll be all over CNN and all over the news, and everybody will see this, and we'll be watching, like, are you tired of watching the news on the pandemic and the, we need more on the pandemic, Sherry and I were talking the other day. I turned the news on. We don't watch it very often, and we turned it on for a minute. It was local news, and she said, "Well, that's news." I said, "What part?" She said, "Well, people getting shot, the pandemic." But it's not news. That's not news. It's whatever it is. It's a story. That's all it is. So for 3.5 years, though, this will be on the news every single day. These men will be out there prophesying the name of Christ, name of God. And let me just read verse 10 for you, and we'll stop right there. And those who dwell on earth will rejoice over them and celebrate, and they will send gifts to another, because these two prophets tormented those who dwell on the earth. So let's stop there for this week. But now people will celebrate their deaths. People, they'll have, now every news station will come out, breaking news, the 2 witnesses have died, and people will celebrate. They'll be giving presents to one another and having birthday cakes and all of this stuff. And it's just, some people will never get it, and some people will. And I think what happens is think about this. It's true. This hardens people. So that's what God is doing. If you have a hard heart, he'll harden it even more. And if you have a soft heart, he'll soften it even more. It's that same old saying that the same sun hardens or softens wax. The same word of God will either soften your hearts or it'll harden your hearts even more. So, good. We'll start with verse 11 here next week.